noise was a monster, a relentless 12-hour-a-day roar that shook the floorboards, vibrated up through the legs, and settled deep in the skull. For an 11-year-old girl, the jute mills of Dundee weren't just a job, they were a prison of sound and fiber. The air was so thick with airborne dust you could taste it. The deafening clatter of the looms so loud it made thought itself a challenge. This was the world that should have broken Mary Slessor. Instead, it forged her. Born in 1848, Mary's world was never one of idyllic Scottish hills. It was one of soot, cramped tenements, and agonizing scarcity, made desperate when her father, a shoemaker, surrendered to alcoholism. His failure cost the family everything, forcing them from Aberdeen into the industrial maze of Dundee, a city where poverty and the mills ruled without mercy. And so, at just 11 years old, Mary was sent to the factory floor. She rose before the sun, her small, young hands learning the harsh, repetitive motions of the loom for 58 brutal hours every week. She was a slender, red-headed girl in a vast, shaking building, a single, tired thread in a brutal, industrial tapestry. Yet, even in the midst of this grinding, mechanical chaos, a quieter rhythm held her heart. It came from a book, propped open on her spinning frame, its pages read in snatched, precious glances. And it came from a whisper, a dream of a land she had never seen. While her hands mended threads in the grey, gas-lit factory, her mind was crossing oceans. This factory girl, this child of the slums, was dreaming of Africa. The call from the loom, Dundee's dark beginning. Allow the noise of the harsh machinery to begin to fade now in your imagination. Let the stillness of the cotton fibers settle in the heavy air around you. Take a slow, deep breath and feel the quiet promise of rest entering your own heart. This moment of silence is sacred, much like the quiet dreams she held while working. Breathe in peace. Breathe out the memory of exhaustion. Feel the weight of the past lift from your shoulders, just as she yearned for escape from the crushing weight of the factory. Let your shoulders relax deeply, sinking into the quiet support beneath you, surrendering to the profound stillness that now begins to envelop you. Allow your muscles to soften, releasing the tension held from the day, finding comfort in the silence that Mary sought. Born in the rugged north of Scotland, Mary's early world was not one of idyllic green hills and comfortable homes, but of soot, cramped tenements, and constant, agonizing scarcity. The year was 1848. Her father, a shoemaker by trade, succumbed entirely to a debilitating weakness for alcohol, and with his health went his employment. This domestic failure, this profound lack of provision, forced the Slessor family to move to the industrialized streets of Dundee, a city where poverty and the relentless demands of the mills ruled without mercy, dictating the fate of every poor family, controlling their very breath and energy. This grim relocation was a pivotal, inescapable moment, shifting the emotional and physical landscape of Mary's early years from one kind of difficulty to another, far more demanding environment. The constant uncertainty taught her a profound and necessary resilience, a quiet toughness that would serve her in the face of far greater dangers. From the age of 11, Mary joined her mother and older brother in the deafening, dust-choked factory. Picture the scene: a slender, red-headed child rising before the sun, often before 5 o'clock in the morning, long before the light ever touched the tenements, heading into the sprawling, windowless mill to work a punishing 12-hour shift 6 full days a week. The air was perpetually grey, thick with airborne particulate and fibers that irritated the throat and lungs, lit only by the weak, flickering gas lamps inside the massive shaking building. The noise was constant, a visceral, thunderous, shaking roar that vibrated through the floorboards into the very bones of the workers and settled deep in the skull, making conversation impossible, making sustained thought itself a challenge. The sound never stopped, a relentless, monotonous drone, a symbol of industrial servitude. The air was thick with fibers and damp heat, and the exhaustion was profound, a permanent ache in her young limbs. Her young hands, meant for gentler pursuits, learned the harsh, repetitive movements of the loom, tying knots and mending threads with speed and precision for 58 brutal hours every single week. She labored and she endured, finding strength in the sheer necessity of the struggle, her focus absolute amidst the mechanical chaos. This routine became the engine of her discipline, hardening her exterior while purifying her spirit. The deep grooves of the loom became etched into her memory, a constant reminder of the physical cost of survival, a sacrifice made for her family. Yet, even in the midst of this grinding toil, a quieter, more powerful rhythm held her heart steady. It was the sacred rhythm of a simple, unwavering faith instilled by her mother. Mrs. Slessor, a weaver by necessity, but a devout Presbyterian by devotion, brought light and spiritual oxygen into the shadows of their one-room home. She faithfully read aloud from the Bible and, crucially, from the monthly Missionary record, a paper that detailed the desperate needs and the spiritual triumphs of those serving overseas. This paper was a tiny, precious window, opened each month into a distant, sun-drenched world, a place of spiritual darkness, yet full of incredible, compelling hope. It was here, amidst the dust and the grime of the factory floor, that Mary first began to dream of Africa. She dreamed of vast open spaces, a profound contrast to the cramped, soot-stained walls that surrounded her. She dreamed of lives redeemed. She yearned for a purpose as wide as the ocean she read about, a contrast to the narrow, predetermined life of a mill worker, seeking a calling that transcended the drudgery she knew. The stories of courage from Africa provided her spirit the sustenance her body lacked, feeding a hunger for something eternal and meaningful. She taught herself to read, propping open books, including the powerful, epic narratives of the Bible and Milton's Paradise Lost, on the spinning frames, snatching glances during the brief, permitted moments between tasks, her hunger for knowledge relentless and determined. Her formal education was cut short, but her education in self-reliance and deep theological truth continued ceaselessly, fueled by midnight oil and unshakable conviction. She also began her missionary work right there in Dundee's notorious slums, teaching Sunday school and confronting the roughest gangs of boys with a quiet, good-humored defiance that often left them stunned into submission. These were her first challenging mission field. One famous tale tells of her refusing to flinch as a local youth swung a heavy metal weight near her face, her eyes holding him without blinking, a testament to pure moral courage. The true victory was not in the defiance, but in the profound peace she carried, a stillness so complete that even the violence of the slums could not shake her resolve. She learned to speak the language of the rough, the abandoned, and the poor, a crucial, priceless skill that no mission training school could ever teach. This early experience taught her how to navigate threats and chaos with the quiet authority of conviction, a preparation she could never have understood at the time, forging an inner strength that would later protect her in the African jungle. This resilience was not inherited, but forged, stroke by quiet stroke of faith, layer by layer of persistent devotion, preparing her for a mission far greater than she could imagine. In this hard environment, Mary was learning the most profound lesson: that God uses the unlikely. She was no product of privilege or gentle schooling. She was hardened, tempered like steel by the reality of abusive men, desperate poverty, and the relentless fight for survival. This very background, which society would have deemed a flaw in her resume, was in fact God's careful, brutal preparation. The chaos of her father's alcoholism and the terror of being pushed out into the street left her with a burning, fierce compassion for vulnerable children. She saw the despair of the poor in Dundee and understood instinctively the desperation of the oppressed anywhere in the world. She knew their hearts because she had lived their pain, and this empathy was her spiritual compass, guiding her toward the truly needy, the broken, and the forgotten. Then, the whisper of Africa grew into a roar. In 1873, the news reached Scotland that David Livingstone, the celebrated missionary explorer, had passed away. Livingstone's challenge, the open door to Africa must not be allowed to close, struck Mary deep in her heart. She felt the baton of service passed directly to her, the petite, determined weaver from the Scottish slums. She realized that the missionary spirit was not limited to men of wealth or high education. It was a calling of sacrificial love, a willingness to give everything, to give herself for the sake of another. The idea that she, Mary Slessor, could be the one to carry on such a noble, monumental work filled her with awe and quiet certainty, a conviction that superseded all self-doubt. When Mary presented herself to the Foreign Missions Board of the United Presbyterian Church, she was 28 years old, single, and had minimal formal training. At a time when women were generally relegated to supportive roles within the mission structure, she declared her willingness to go anywhere the Lord needed her, without condition or complaint. Her request was unconventional, revolutionary even, but her zeal was undeniable. She was accepted and assigned to Calabar, near the southeastern coast of present-day Nigeria, a land known ominously as the white man's grave due to the constant threat of fever and disease. Her motivation was rooted in a profound and simple theology. She saw the vast, untamed wilderness of Africa and knew that her own resources, her small stature, her lack of formal power, her limited education, were utterly insufficient. This recognition was, paradoxically, her greatest strength, for it meant her reliance was wholly on God and not herself. She placed the matter completely in the hands of the great I Am, praying, "Lord, the task is impossible for me, but not for thee. Lead the way, and I will follow. Why should I fear? I'm on a royal mission. I'm in the service of the King of Kings." Breathe in the courage of the missionary. Breathe out your own personal lack of confidence. She set sail in August of 1876 aboard the SS Ethiopia. The ship moved slowly, deliberately, across the vast, rolling sea, trading the familiar grey winds of Scotland for the intense azure of the tropics. The ocean provided a vast, rolling silence, a stark change from the mill's thunder. As the last sight of home faded behind her, Mary Slessor did not look back. in regret. She looked forward with a faith as simple and determined as the rhythmic beat of the looms she had left behind. She understood that she was not taking her own strength, her own achievements, or her own qualifications to Africa. She was carrying nothing but the good news of God's grace and a personality forged in the furnace of hardship. Her life's tapestry, woven in the dark factory of Dundee, was about to unfold in the bright, burning sun of West Africa. This transition from the familiar, crushing noise to the wide, unfamiliar silence of the sea prepared her for the radical, terrifying work that awaited in a land where custom demanded the taking of life of the innocent. Mary Slessor, the mill girl, was now Mary Slessor, the missionary, carrying the truth that the God of comfort is present in the darkest corners of the world. She rested her confidence not in her ability to perform, but in the certainty that God was leading. The long days of labor were over, and the ship carried her toward a land where the darkness was not from coal smoke, but from spiritual despair. She was going where life was cheap, and where a child's birth could be a sentence to perish. Her journey had only just begun. The unconventional missionary setting sail for Calabar. The ship cut through the vast dark waters, trading the cool grey winds of Scotland for the heavy, suffocating warmth of the tropics. After weeks at sea, the air itself became a character in the story, thick with humidity, salt, and the distant, pungent scent of the West African coast. This was not the paradise of missionary dreams, but the white man's grave, a land of lush, overwhelming beauty, hiding untold danger and disease. The oppressive humidity settled upon the skin like a damp, persistent blanket, a profound physical test for a newcomer from the chilly north. When Mary Slessor stepped ashore in September of 1876, the city of Calabar, or Old Calabar as it was known, was a bewildering spectacle of intense commerce and spiritual contradiction. The mission station in Duketown, established by previous missionaries, offered a degree of safety and Western comfort. Yet, this mission compound, with its orderly routines and practical Victorian dress, felt to Mary like a barrier, not a bridge. The polished surfaces and strict dining rituals seemed a world apart from the desperate souls outside its gates. It separated the workers from the very people they were sent to serve. Her heart, forged in the grit of the Dundee slums, yearned for the raw, real life of the villages. She knew that walls of separation only reinforced fear and distrust, and she intended to tear them down with her actions. Mary was immediately struck by the slow pace and the social distance observed by the European residents. She saw women stifled by oppressive customs, and children, especially the very vulnerable, suffering under ancient, fearful beliefs. She knew instinctively that her mission was not to be a European teacher dispensing charity from a distance, but to become an immersed servant, a companion in the struggle. Her first radical step was to discard the impractical uniform of the era. The heavy, multiple layers of Victorian clothing were a hindrance in the intense, damp heat. She abandoned them, adopting simple, lightweight garments more suited to the climate and the pace of her work. She cut her hair short, an act of non-conformity that baffled her colleagues but signaled to the locals a practical, down-to-earth spirit. She was refusing the cultural pedestal that colonization often placed Europeans upon. She was declaring, not with words, but with her very presence, that she intended to meet the people where they lived. This act of shedding her European identity was her first great sacrifice on the field, a commitment to vulnerability, but the physical adaptation was secondary to the mental challenge. The local language, Efik, was complex, rhythmic, and essential for true connection. Mary threw herself into its mastery with the same tireless energy she once applied to the loom. She understood that only through their own language could she deliver the good news to their hearts and minds, not just their ears. Many missionaries learned enough Efik to preach or teach, but Mary sought fluency, a depth that allowed for humor, deep friendship, and genuine empathy. She developed what the Efik people themselves would eventually call an Efik mouth, a mastery that astonished them and earned her their immediate respect. She was not just reading to them, she was entering their conversations, their debates, and their disputes, becoming a member of their linguistic world. Breathe in the wisdom of connecting deeply with those around you. Exhale the need for superficial understanding. Let your mind settle on the profound effort required to truly understand another. Feel the quiet focus required for such dedication. However, the coastal mission station felt too safe, too established. Previous work had eliminated some of the worst tribal customs in the immediate vicinity, yet just a few miles inland, beyond the reach of the settled missions, the old, dark practices still reigned. Mary's spirit, which had so long dreamed of walking in Livingstone's pioneer footsteps, chafed at the slow, organized routine. She ached for the unreached. She knew that to stay in the comfort zone of Duketown was to leave thousands untouched by the grace she carried. She saw the vast forests and the winding rivers, and she felt the call of the interior, the places where the gospel had never been proclaimed. This yearning was fueled by the stark contrast between the mission compound and the surrounding reality. While there was Christian teaching, the deep cultural belief systems that led to slavery, ritual ending of life, and the terror of destruction of a child at birth remained fiercely entrenched among the upcountry tribes. The darkness of the unreached interior was a physical weight on her soul, a burden she felt compelled to lift. Mary was ready to risk malaria, the dangerous animals, and the volatile tribal politics. She began to venture out constantly, traveling to outlying villages, teaching in small schools, and bringing medicine to the sick. She was a woman of fierce urgency, convinced that every passing day was a delay in salvation for someone in the darkness. Her mission was to show the difference between the fear-based gods of the tribal religion and the God of grace, love, and protection revealed through Jesus Christ. The work demanded a total faith in God's protective hand. She knew that the fever could end her life at any moment, as it had ended the lives of others. She knew that the rough environment was constantly trying to break her down. Yet, her early life in the Dundee slums, where she endured long hours, poor sanitation, and the constant threat of violence, had prepared her body and spirit for this very battle. She stood strong, not because she was robust, but because her trust was anchored in an invisible, yet unshakable reality. Her courage was the tangible evidence of her faith, a quiet, resilient beacon. This refusal to stay put, to follow the established European protocol, set Mary Slessor apart. She was often viewed with mild suspicion by her European peers who preferred structure and comfort. But for the local people, this strange, small, red-headed woman who spoke their language and ignored the safety of the mission house, was becoming a living testament to the God who leaves the 99 to seek the one lost sheep in the wilderness. Her initial 3 years was spent in preparation, deep learning, and constant outreach, like a bow being slowly drawn back, gathering tension for the arrow's flight. She was gathering the cultural knowledge and spiritual fortitude necessary for the great push inland, the place where no European had dared to settle. The most critical lesson was simple. To reach the people, she had to become one of them, to remove every barrier built by fear, custom, or pride. Mary Slessor's next great task was to secure the key to their hearts, the Aphic language. Learning the language of the heart, the Aphic keys. To truly enter a new world, one must speak its words, feel its syntax, and understand the weight of its proverbs. Mary Slessor knew that the Aphic language was not simply a tool for communication, but a sacred key necessary to unlock the hearts and minds of the people she served. Without this key, her message, however pure, would remain distant, wrapped in the cold alienation of the foreign tongue. The language barrier was the first fortress she had to breach, and she did so with a dedication that astonished everyone. Imagine the tireless effort required of Mary, the mill girl with limited schooling, to master a language entirely foreign to her ear. It was a dedication mirroring the long, repetitive hours she once spent at the loom. Only now, the threads were phonetic sounds and cultural idioms. She immersed herself completely, choosing to spend time with the local women and children, listening intently, repeating phrases until they flowed naturally from her tongue. Her dedication was driven by a deep sense of calling, a relentless spiritual drive. If God had sent her, she must use every available means to make his message clear. The quiet mastery of Aphic became her first indispensable victory, securing the means of deep cultural engagement. She knew that the language was rich, subtle, and full of metaphor. To translate the gospel literally would be to miss its meaning entirely. For example, she had to navigate a culture steeped in animism, where the spirits of the sky, the sun, the rivers, and the trees were worshipped and feared. To speak of a single, invisible, loving God required not just translation, but transliteration, recasting divine truth into terms that made sense within the Aphic worldview. This careful work of linguistic bridge building was a form of worship, a quiet, scholarly labor undertaken in the shadow of the jungle. The mastery was so complete that the Aphic people began to speak of her remarkable ability, saying Mary possessed an Aphic mouth. This was not just a compliment to her grammar, but a sign of acceptance, a recognition that she saw the world, at least partially, through their eyes. This fluency allowed her to bypass the customary suspicion of European outsiders and build relationships based on mutual understanding and respect. She could joke with them, argue with them, and comfort them, all within the nuanced boundaries of their shared tongue. Through this deep immersion, Mary began to understand the true darkness and the hidden anxieties that gripped the community. She realized that much of the cruelty she sought to abolish, such as the ceremonial ending of a person's life and the destruction of a child at birth, stemmed not from inherent wickedness, but from profound, pervasive fear. They feared the evil spirits, they feared the anger of the ancestors, and above all, they feared the curse. Their lives were dictated by a cycle of terror and appeasement, and Mary saw the heart of the spiritual bondage. The fear surrounding the birth of twins was particularly devastating. In the Efik and Okoyong belief systems, a twin birth was considered an abomination, a sign that the mother had sinned greatly and that one of the infants was fathered by an evil spirit. Unable to distinguish the good baby from the evil one, both were ended, and the mother subsequently banished. Mary learned that the people did this not out of malice, but out of a desperate, twisted attempt to protect the community from spiritual contamination, believing they were securing their own survival. This knowledge transformed her ministry. Her work was no longer just about preaching abstract theology. It was about addressing the root cause of their suffering, fear of the demonic, with the power of the only true King. She realized the gospel's power was not just for heaven, but for practical, earthly deliverance from terror and loss of life right now, an immediate, tangible salvation. The language of the heart is universal, but its expression is cultural. Mary used her Efik mouth to advocate fiercely for the women and children she served. She confronted the chiefs, not by quoting Scottish law, but by reasoning with them, using their own proverbs and their own deep-seated cultural value for life. Her arguments were always framed by the factual, uplifting, and protective nature of the one true God who honors the lives of all children, without exception. She learned that true Christian missions required sacrifice, not just of money or comfort, but of one's own cultural identity. By embracing the language and living simply, Mary was demonstrating the core tenet of the Incarnation, that God chose to dwell among us, using the language and culture of humanity. She made herself vulnerable and approachable, shedding the authority of the colonial outsider and taking on the humility of a fellow resident. This genuine sacrifice earned her a trust that no amount of money or force could ever buy. Her daily tasks of teaching, dispensing medicine, and arbitrating disputes were all conducted in Efik. The small conversations, the late-night talks, the patient explanations, all served to chip away at the walls of superstition. She was building a foundation of relational trust, stone by linguistic stone. When she spoke the words of comfort, they resonated not as foreign doctrine, but as the voice of someone who understood their suffering, their history, and their fears. This linguistic and cultural immersion was the prelude to her great journey inland. It was the training ground that prepared her for the much fiercer, more isolated challenges that awaited in the Okoyong region. She carried a profound knowledge of the local mind and heart, realizing that every act of kindness, every moment of patience, was a demonstration of a power greater than any juju. The language she learned in Calabar would become her spiritual shield in the wilderness. Now, with the tools of language and cultural knowledge secured, she was prepared for the ultimate risk, stepping into the unknown heart of the Okoyong territory, the dark heart of tradition, cosmology, and the juju. To truly measure Mary Slessor's achievement, one must grasp the absolute power of the spiritual fear she confronted. The Efik and Okoyong people lived within a complex, deeply rationalized cosmos, governed not by abstract evil, but by specific, often vindictive, spiritual forces. Mary understood that unless she defeated the theological basis for their cruelties, her work would be purely superficial. The ancestral fear, Ekpu. The traditional religion held that the spirits of the ancestors, Ekpu, were highly active and demanded constant appeasement. An ancestor could bring prosperity or calamity, depending on the respect shown by the living. This belief was the spiritual justification for the ritual ending of a person's life. When a powerful chief passed away, he required followers to serve him in the spirit world, Obio Ekpo. The ceremonial ending of a person's life, whether a slave, a wife, or a servant, was not seen as a malicious, unlawful taking of life, but a necessary rite of passage to ensure the chief's spirit, and thus the entire lineage, remained powerful and benevolent. If the chief's spirit was dissatisfied due to a lack of proper observance, the whole clan faced disaster, disease, or famine. Mary fought this custom by arguing that the Christian God, the supreme creator, had already provided the ultimate observance in Christ, negating the need for any further earthly taking of life. This was a profound theological argument framed within their own spiritual worldview. The problem of pollution, ikot. The fear surrounding twins stemmed from a concept of spiritual pollution, ikot. A twin birth was unnatural, violating the order established by the Supreme Being, Abasi. It was believed that the mother had committed adultery with an evil forest spirit, and the resulting birth was a monstrous contamination of the community. The practice of destruction of a child at birth was a desperate form of quarantine, a measure to prevent the spiritual ikot from spreading through the village and drawing down the Creator's wrath. Mary had to convince them that the innocence of the babies negated the supposed contamination. She used the logic of nature. If God has created two beautiful flowers, why do you say one is a curse? Her logic was backed by the undeniable survival and health of her rescued twins, providing visible proof that their fear was based on a lie, not reality. The ordeal of Sassawood, poison tests. The common method for determining guilt in cases of witchcraft or poisoning was the Sassawood ordeal, a terrifying test of fate. The accused would be forced to drink a toxic infusion prepared by the witch doctor. If the person survived by vomiting up the poison, they were innocent. If they perished or showed severe distress, they were guilty, justifying the criminal ending of life. This system allowed the witch doctors, who controlled the dosage, and powerful chiefs, who pointed the finger, to exercise absolute control through fear and lethal mass ending of life. Mary Slessor's intervention in these cases was direct and physical. She would often arrive at the scene of an ordeal, physically knock the bowl of poison out of the accused's hand, and demand the issue be settled in her court of equity. Her power was derived from the simple, irrefutable fact that she was willing to risk her own life to save others from the ordeal, demonstrating a higher moral law than the arbitrary justice of the juju. Mary's mission, therefore, was not merely about moralizing. It was a complex, continuous war against an entire, functional, and terrifyingly logical spiritual system. She had to replace the entire foundation of ethic and Okoyong security and justice with the certainty of God's redemptive love. A woman's fierce courage. Stepping into Okoyong, the map of the region held a stark warning. Beyond the settled coastal areas lay the Okoyong territory, a vast inland district veiled in dense forest and guarded by tribes renowned for their violence. This was the true wilderness, the place where no missionary, particularly no single woman, had dared to establish a lasting presence, and where several male missionaries had met their end. In the year 1888, Mary Slessor decided that this forbidden place was where God was calling her next. She had spent 12 years on the periphery in Calabar, learning, adapting, and gathering the cultural weapons necessary for this moment. Now, the quiet conviction of her soul demanded a radical advance. She believed that as a woman, she might be less threatening to the fiercely territorial tribesmen, and her message of peace and healing might find a narrow door where a male authority figure could not. Her gender became a strategic advantage in a land where custom dictated the rules of engagement, allowing her to approach when others would be met with immediate hostility. Mary did not wait for formal permission or a heavily funded expedition. She moved with simple, unshakable faith, carrying only basic supplies and her profound knowledge of the Efik language. Her journey north up the Cross River was a deliberate step away from the thin security of the mission station and into the raw, unpredictable heart of the continent. She left the relative safety of the mission house for a small, simple mud hut, choosing to live exactly as the Okoyong people lived. This commitment to radical simplicity was not merely tactical, it was spiritual. By shedding the trappings of European wealth and privilege, she created a space of true equality. She ate the local food, walked barefoot through the villages, and endured the stifling heat and the constant threat of disease without the elaborate precautions Europeans usually adopted. This vulnerability, instead of making her weak, made her trustworthy. It was a tangible demonstration that her power came not from money or empire, but from an invisible, sustaining God. The darkness of the Okoyong region was multifaceted. It was a land where the law of the tribe was brutal, settled often by poison and sudden violence. Slavery was rampant, and the constant feuds between communities made travel perilous. But the greatest darkness was the pervasive, crippling fear of malevolent spirits and the iron grip of the witch doctors, whose power relied on superstition and terror. At the heart of this fear was the cruel custom of destruction of a child at birth. The people believed that the birth of twins was a catastrophic curse, the result of one twin being fathered by an evil spirit. Unable to distinguish the good baby from the evil one, both were ended, usually abandoned in a clay pot in the bush, and the mother was cast out as an outcast. This practice was the starkest, most agonizing example of the spiritual oppression Mary had come to fight. Her primary mission became the immediate and tangible demonstration of God's protective love, rescuing the abandoned twins. She would hear the dreadful news, often through trusted local friends, and immediately rush into the bush. Sometimes she was too late, only finding the empty clay pots. But often she was able to retrieve the terrified, vulnerable infants, bringing them back to her humble hut. Her home quickly became a busy, chaotic nursery, a beautiful, radical sign of life triumphing over loss. The presence of these rescued children was Mary's most potent, silent sermon. Every bouncing baby, every growing child was a living contradiction to the belief in the curse. They were healthy, whole, and loved, proving that the fear that ruled the tribe was a lie. Her first and most famous adopted daughter, Janie, rescued from a twin birth where her brother had not survived, became the emblem of this ministry. Mary's audacity in adopting these children challenged the fundamental social and religious structure of the Okoyong. The chiefs and the tribal elders watched her with a mixture of suspicion, curiosity, and grudging respect. They saw a woman with no husband, no armed guard, and no wealth, yet possessing an undeniable inner authority. When they threatened her, she would stand firm, often using her sharp humor or fierce indignation to subdue a volatile situation. When they fought, she would physically place herself between the combatants, her simple presence shaming them into peace. She became a fixture in the community, not as a ruler, but as a neutral, trusted advocate. She taught the children, treated the sick with basic medical knowledge, and, most importantly, listened. She was the constant, reliable presence of Christ in a land of volatile chaos. For 15 years, Mary Slessor lived deeply among the Okoyong and Efik people, her unwavering presence slowly eroding the centuries-old structures of fear. She was living out the promise of the gospel with every breath and every saved life. Her very existence in that dangerous territory was a miracle, a continuous testimony to the faithfulness of the God who provides strength for the impossible task. She had gained their respect, but the final test of her authority would be to command peace amidst bloodshed. The fearless peacemaker, stopping tribal wars. The jungle held a deceptive quiet, often broken without warning by the raw, terrifying sound of war. The blast of a musketry shot or the frantic beating of the war drums signaled a sudden descent into chaos, fueled by ancient grievances, disputes over trade routes, or retaliatory acts resulting in the taking of life. In the Okoyong territory, life was volatile, and justice was often swift and bloody, exacting a terrible cost on the entire community. When conflict flared, no one expected a single European woman to intervene. Indeed, logic dictated that she should seek shelter in her small hut and wait for the storm to pass. Yet, Mary Slessor's commitment to the gospel of peace demanded a different, radical response. Her intervention was not simply about preserving order. It was about demonstrating that the Christian God was a source of shalom, a comprehensive, life-giving wholeness that extinguished the fire of vengeance. Mary's greatest weapon was her earned reputation. For years, she had lived among the people, eating their food, speaking their language, and treating their sickness. She was impartial, unattached to any single tribe in their endless feuds. This neutrality, combined with her fierce maternal authority, the presence of Eka Kapukpru Owo, the mother of all people, made her intervention uniquely possible. Picture the scene: 2 armed camps, men shouting, brandishing machetes and muskets, fueled by palm wine and rage, ready to spill blood and end a life. Into the gap between them, Mary would walk, often alone, her small frame silhouetted against the dark greens of the forest. She carried no weapon, only the calm conviction of her purpose. Her confidence was absolute, rooted not in bravado, but in the belief that God had placed her there for this precise moment. She knew that her physical safety was secondary to the mission of saving lives. Her methods were unconventional and utterly effective. She did not preach fire and brimstone. She employed a disarming blend of shock, humor, and practical reasoning. Sometimes, she would simply stand in silence, her quiet disapproval shaming the combatants. Other times, she would launch into a torrent of epic scolding, her voice cutting through the noise, treating the fully grown warriors like quarreling children. One famous incident involved 2 chiefs engaged in a bitter, escalating trade dispute that threatened to ignite a full-scale war. Mary listened patiently to the grievances of both sides, letting them exhaust their arguments of pride and perceived injustice. Then, with a sudden, audacious proposal, she ended the feud. She declared that if they insisted on carrying on with this bloodshed, they must finalize their alliance in the most ancient and shocking way. She offered to prick both their hands and command them to suck each other's blood. The chiefs, frozen by the grotesque and utterly un-European suggestion, were stunned into silence. The dramatic absurdity of the scene broke the tension and provided an immediate mutual path to de-escalation that allowed them to save face. This was Mary's genius. She spoke to them in the language of their custom, using her cultural knowledge to introduce a spiritual truth. She showed them the ugliness of their own violence and then offered a route back to sanity. In mediating these disputes, Mary was establishing a crucial principle. Life holds more value than vengeance or profit. She did not simply stop the fighting, she helped negotiate fair trade terms, settle land boundaries, and mediate accusations of poisoning or witchcraft. She was a living court of appeals, moving from one crisis to the next, often trekking long distances through the night in torrential rain, following only a whispered warning of imminent violence. These heroic acts of intervention accomplished two vital things for the mission. First, they saved countless lives, sparing villages from being destroyed and preventing the creation of new widows and orphans. Second, they built an undeniable credibility that no amount of evangelistic preaching could achieve alone. The people saw the goodness of God not as a distant European concept, but as the tangible, life-saving power emanating from the white woman in the mud hut. By acting as a fearless peacemaker, Mary was preparing the ground for the gospel message. Her courage opened doors for the Bible, where force would have been met with a violent end. She proved that the God of peace was more powerful than the spirits of war and confusion. She was the one who could walk safely through the lion's den, her protection a clear sign to all that the King of Kings was watching over her royal mission. Her quiet authority had proven stronger than their weaponry, making her rescues possible. The curse of the twins, the rescue of Janie. The sound of silence in the dense Okoyong bush could often be more terrifying than the clash of war drums. It was the silence that followed a terrible, swift act, the ritual disposal of newborn twins. In this land, the event of a twin birth was considered the deepest calamity, a stark sign of spiritual contamination that brought fear and disaster upon the entire village. Imagine the pervasive terror that gripped a community at the news of twins. The ancient, deeply ingrained belief held that one of the two infants must have been fathered by an evil spirit, and the birth itself was proof of the mother's great sin. Unable to distinguish the good baby from the evil one, both were ended, usually abandoned in a clay pot in the bush, and the mother was cast out as an outcast. This practice was the starkest, most agonizing example of the spiritual oppression Mary had come to fight. Her intelligence network, built through years of trust and language mastery, was her alert system. Often, a trusted local friend or a desperate family member would whisper the news of a birth. Mary would set out immediately, racing against the clock of tradition and loss. She traversed the dangerous, winding paths, driven by the knowledge that tiny, innocent lives were waiting, exposed to the elements and wild animals. It was during one such harrowing rescue that Mary met her most famous adopted child, a girl she named Janie. 2 babies had been born. The villagers had disposed of both. When Mary reached the remote location, She found one of the infants had already perished, but the girl, weak and silent, was still alive. Mary carefully retrieved the infant, protecting the tiny body and bringing it back to her own simple mud hut. She nursed the child back to health, feeding her painstakingly and caring for her with a fierce, protective love. Janie survived, becoming the first and most cherished daughter in Mary's ever-growing, unconventional family. Janie, the rescued twin, was a living miracle. Her very presence in Mary's home defied the Okoyong belief system. She was healthy, vibrant, and undeniably blessed. Mary, who had been unable to bear children of her own, poured her deep, maternal love into these rescued infants. Her hut, meant to be a simple, quiet dwelling, soon became a chaotic, joyful foundling's home, a vibrant mission nursery alive with babies. Each rescued twin was a deliberate, tangible contradiction to the lie of the curse. Mary was not simply saving lives, she was saving a spiritual truth by demonstrating God's unconditional love and protection. She showed the people that these children, far from being demonic, were precious gifts. She raised them to know the God who values every life equally and who sent his own son into the world not as a king, but as a vulnerable infant. The chiefs, the village elders, and the witch doctors could not deny the evidence before their eyes. Mary's children flourished. They learned, they laughed, and they grew in the simple, loving environment she provided. This silent, living testimony began to soften the hard ground of superstition. Mary's work shifted from simply saving individual babies to actively transforming the social and religious consciousness of the tribe. She expanded her efforts by training trustworthy Efik individuals as twins missioners, sending them out to distant villages to identify twin births early, protect the infants, and bring them safely to the mission house. This organizational effort showed her relentless commitment to the cause, relying on the growing faith of the native people themselves to help end the custom. The adoption of Janie cemented Mary's identity as Eka Kapukpru Owo, the mother of all people. Her home was a haven, a place where the social barriers of the tribe dissolved. She took on the full responsibility of these dozens of children, providing food, education, and spiritual guidance, often relying on simple, direct prayers for God to supply the necessary resources. She truly lived as a mother, embracing the constant chaos and the constant worry, yet finding profound joy in the daily reality of nurturing life. This role as protector was so foundational that the community gave her a sacred title, one that spoke of her ultimate influence. The domestic heart of the mission, the mother of a nation, Mary's reputation as a tireless missionary often overshadows her constant, demanding role as a mother to a burgeoning, multi-tribal family. Her home in Okoyong was the mission's true heart, a chaotic, joyful, and utterly unconventional household that served as the living laboratory of the Christian faith. This domestic mission was, arguably, her most effective form of evangelism. The nursery and the chaos. Mary eventually raised dozens of children, most of them rescued twins or orphans abandoned due to superstition or the slave trade. Her mud hut was constantly noisy and demanding. She had to be teacher, nurse, disciplinarian, cook, and tailor, all while managing the spiritual and legal demands of the surrounding territory. Her resources were minimal, often consisting of a few bundles of cloth, some cornmeal, and her medical supplies. The children were taught to care for one another, The older, adopted daughters, like Janie, became crucial submothers, helping to bathe, feed, and manage the infants. This communal parenting model, driven by necessity and Christian love, directly contrasted with the isolation and fear of the tribal system. Mary insisted on order and hard work. Laziness was her greatest domestic enemy, and she taught the children that their survival and future depended on their industry. She maintained an educational schedule, a laundry schedule, and a chore roster, all in ethic, all enforced by her own quiet but iron will. The economics of the household, running this large family, required constant financial ingenuity. Mary received a small stipend from the mission, but it was rarely sufficient. She relied heavily on growing her own food, cassava, yams, and corn, and teaching the children to process and sell simple goods in the market. She was a shrewd negotiator, ensuring the children received fair value for their labor, teaching them integrity and business acumen that prepared them for the changing regional economy. The financial anxieties were profound, captured clearly in her letters. She wrote of days when the storehouse was empty, praying specifically for a bag of salt or a box of needles. The consistent, often miraculous, arrival of funds or supplies from supporters in Scotland was her daily proof of God's provision. She saw the children as a direct link to heaven's storehouse, believing that God would always sustain the mission because innocent lives depended on it. The education of character, more important than academics, was the education of character. Mary ensured the children learned compassion, self-reliance, and justice. When disputes arose among the children, which was often given the crowded conditions, Mary arbitrated with the same firmness and fairness she used with the chiefs. She taught them to reject the old ways of vengeance and poison, insisting instead on truth and reconciliation. Her home was a living parable of Christian community, demonstrating to the entire Okoyong that the God who saves infants also equips them to live productive, ethical lives. This domestic mission was the quiet, powerful forge where the next generation of Efik and Okoyong Christian leaders were tempered. Eka Kapukpru Owo, becoming the mother of all the title, was not given by a distant board in Scotland, nor was it bestowed by a colonial official. It was whispered among the very people Mary Slessor served. They called her Eka Kapukpru Owo, which in the Efik language means mother of all the people. This name, warm and deeply personal, spoke of a belonging that transcended race, custom, and fear. Mary's mission was not confined to Sunday services or Bible distribution. It was a holistic ministry that saw the whole person, body, mind, and spirit as needing redemption. Her daily life was a relentless testament to this belief, transforming a simple mud hut into a multifaceted center of learning, healing, and spiritual growth. The rhythm of her days was constant, caring for her growing family of adopted twins, teaching the local children, and tending to the sick. The education she provided was deliberately practical. She understood that to truly free the Efik and Okoyong people, they needed not just spiritual truth, but the tools for self-sufficiency. She established simple schools, teaching children to read and write, using her Bible and the few books she possessed. This was an education that empowered them, preparing a new generation to participate constructively in their own society and to lead with Christian principles. Simultaneously, she acted as a tireless medical worker. Disease, especially malaria and smallpox, swept through the villages with terrifying speed. Mary, though lacking formal medical training, carried a small chest of basic medicines, dispensing simple treatments, and, in later years, bravely leading local vaccination efforts against smallpox. She understood that healing the body was often the quickest path to opening a mind to the great physician. When she treated a high fever or stopped a painful rash, she was demonstrating God's tangible compassion, contradicting the witch doctors who often relied on superstition and harmful practices. Her influence extended directly to the advancement of women's rights, a quiet but revolutionary aspect of her ministry. In the hierarchical tribal structure, women were often treated as property, burdened by cruel expectations and subjected to harsh punishments, including the ending of life at the passing of their husbands. Mary used her growing reputation to stand against these practices, teaching women their inherent value as children of God. She provided them with a safe haven, taught them skills, and gave them a voice, offering them a new status in the community as beloved and equal members. The noise of the constant coming and going in Mary's home was a living, breathing symphony of redemption. It was the sound of children learning, the sounds of healing prayer, and the sounds of women finding their dignity. All these interwoven activities proved that the gospel brings not just personal salvation, but societal transformation. She was literally building a more just and loving society from the ground up, one life at a time. This powerful, protective presence was recognized by the local communities as a spiritual authority, far surpassing any colonial power. They trusted her to be fair, honest, and courageous. When she spoke against the practice of ceremonial ending of a person's life, the buying and selling of people, or the use of poison, her words carried weight because her life provided irrefutable proof of her motives. She sought only the people's total well-being. The name Eka Kapukpru Ovo was the fruit of her radical contextualization. She chose to be a resident, not a visitor. She refused to live in the relative comfort of a European compound because she knew that the walls that kept the danger out also kept the people out. By living among them, in conditions familiar to them, she eliminated the distance of class and culture, making her an approachable, maternal figure. She faced the same daily hardships as her neighbors: the heat, the poor sanitation, the ever-present insects, and the lack of comfort. This shared suffering made her appeals genuine, and her advice resonate deeply. She found contentment and joy in this simple, challenging life, famously writing that despite the struggle, she was the happiest woman in all the world because she was trusted to do God's work. Mary Slessor, the tiny red-headed Scotswoman, had become the spiritual mother of an entire region, fulfilling the deepest purpose of her royal mission. Her constant presence, her unwavering devotion to the innocent, and her tireless effort to bring both healing and dignity to the marginalized demonstrated the practical, transformative love of God. She had laid the cultural groundwork for change, proving that a life anchored in faith could overcome the fiercest traditions. This respect and authority would soon be formalized, granting her the legal power she needed to protect her flock. The pedagogy of the pioneer, education for independence. Mary Slessor's vision for mission extended far beyond rescuing the victims of cultural violence. She sought to make the Okoyong people economically and intellectually independent, believing that a sound spiritual life required a stable material foundation. Her schools were not based on the rigid, classical European models, but were innovative, practical institutions designed for the realities of the West African jungle. The curriculum of necessity. The curriculum she implemented was a masterpiece of necessity. While literacy, reading and writing, ethic, was essential for reading the Bible and engaging in modern commerce, the bulk of the teaching was vocational. Agriculture and sustainability. Recognizing that land disputes often led to tribal warfare, Mary emphasized improved farming techniques. She taught them how to rotate crops, use better tools, and raise healthier livestock. Her goal was to produce a sustainable surplus, mitigating the constant threat of famine and demonstrating God's principle of abundance over scarcity. Trades and skills. Boys were taught carpentry, simple building techniques, and tool maintenance. This allowed the community to build stronger homes, schools, and eventually churches, reducing reliance on expensive imports. Girls were taught needlework, weaving, and domestic skills with a clear economic purpose. They produced marketable cloth and clothing, enabling them to earn their own wealth and elevating their status beyond mere childbearers or property. Mathematics for the market. Basic arithmetic was taught meticulously. Mary knew the Aro traders were often skilled at cheating illiterate villagers. Her students learned to count change, calculate fair trade prices, and manage simple accounts. Education, in Mary's view, was a shield against exploitation, the school of self-reliance. Mary's greatest teaching tool was the principle of self-reliance. She did not simply hand out charity, she facilitated capacity building. Students were often required to contribute labor to the mission fields or schools to offset the cost of their materials. This instilled a deep sense of ownership and personal value in their education, showing them that the mission was not a European project, but their future. She taught entirely in Efik, fiercely prioritizing the vernacular. This was a radical stance against the prevalent colonial idea that only English or the ruling language conferred legitimacy. By teaching the gospel and practical skills in their own tongue, she ensured the knowledge was deeply rooted and not seen as a foreign imposition. This cultural respect was the cornerstone of her long-term success, ensuring that the Christian faith was adopted as an African faith, not merely a European one. The children she trained became the first generation of literate, independent citizens of the region. The nurses, catechists, and skilled artisans who would eventually lead the Cross River region into the 20th century were often those who passed through the rudimentary desks of Mary Slessor's mud hut schools. Appointed by the king, the first female vice-consul, the official document arrived, crisp and unexpected, bearing the seal of the British Crown, yet its true authority resided in the heart of a Scottish mill girl. The colonial powers, frustrated by their inability to control the volatile, interior tribes of Okoyong, had decided on a radical, unprecedented measure. They appointed Mary Slessor as vice-consul and president of the native court in 1892. Imagine the astonishment of the tribal chiefs and the colonial administrators alike. Here was a small, single woman, unattached to any colonial governor, who was about to be granted the highest judicial authority in a territory ruled by fierce, armed men. Mary accepted the role not for the prestige, which she intensely disliked, but for the power it provided to protect the vulnerable. Her mission had always been to save the innocent. And now she had the legal hammer to enforce God's compassion. This appointment was a testament to her earned credibility. The British government recognized that Mary Slessor possessed a unique, indispensable authority. She understood the people, spoke their language flawlessly, and was universally respected for her fairness. She was the only person who could bridge the vast, distrustful gap between the warring tribes and the distant European administration. Mary's courtroom was not a grand chamber, but often a simple spot beneath a tree or the open space in a village square. Her judicial style was as unconventional as her life. She did not rely on stiff British legal codes, which would have been meaningless to the Okoyong, but on wisdom, local knowledge, and an unwavering moral compass. Her judgments were pragmatic, restorative, and deeply aimed at establishing true community peace. When disputes arose over trade, land, or marriage, Mary would listen patiently, absorbing the nuances and the underlying personal resentments. She would often begin by using a proverb or a well-timed jest in Efik to break the tension, mirroring the unexpected humor she used to stop tribal wars. Her goal was never punishment in the European sense, but reconciliation and the establishment of a clear, lasting resolution. The most profound impact of her judicial role was the legal enforcement of the ban on the destruction of a child at birth. Before her appointment, Mary's work of rescue was based only on spiritual force and personal courage. Now, when a twin birth occurred, the law was unequivocally on the side of life. She could, with the backing of the colonial power, declare the custom a crime, protecting the babies and the mothers with the full weight of the new legal structure. This transition from individual heroism to institutional change was a watershed moment for the region. Mary's court also served to strengthen the status of women. She was a constant, powerful advocate for women's rights, ensuring they received fair treatment in divorce and inheritance cases, and actively working to abolish customs like the ending of life of widows upon their husband's passing. Her presence as the ultimate authority figure shattered local preconceptions about female weakness, showing them that a woman could hold power with wisdom and compassion. This blending of spiritual purpose with civil authority was delicate work. Mary was careful to ensure that her role as vice consul served her mission as a Christian first. She used the court to introduce the rule of law, the principle of objective, fair justice, which she framed as a reflection of God's own universal truth and order. This was not a power grab. It was a necessary tool to enforce the compassion of the gospel, where simple preaching had failed to save lives. Even in her judicial capacity, she maintained her simple life. She was frequently called away from her nursery and her adopted children, requiring long, arduous treks to distant villages to preside over cases. She traveled light, walking for hours under the harsh sun, embodying the tireless service she preached. She saw these duties not as a burden on her ministry, but as an extension of her ministry, a chance to bring light and truth into the darkest aspects of Okoyong life. Mary Slessor, the quiet, red-headed Scotswoman, had become the spiritual queen of Okoyong in the hearts of the people, and now the temporal judge of their affairs. Her life was a testimony to God's grace, proving that the King of Kings places his authority not in the hands of the wealthy or the powerful, but in the humble and faithful who are willing to serve the broken. Mary had successfully used the civil power bestowed upon her to bring an end to the cruelest of customs. Yet the vast unexplored interior still beckoned, and the struggle against the dominion of fear still awaited its next confrontation. The juju and the gospel confronting the darkness. The Okoyong forest held not only the promise of lush, green life, but the deep, paralyzing shadow of superstition. The people lived in constant dread of malevolent forces, believing that sickness, poor harvests, and loss of life were the direct result of curses or angry spirits, manipulated by powerful local witch doctors. This was the terrifying dominion of the Juju, a kingdom of fear that Mary Slessor had come to challenge with the light of simple, certain truth. The clash between the Juju and the gospel was not abstract. It was intensely personal and often dramatic. When a prominent chief or a village elder fell ill with a mysterious affliction, panic would quickly take hold. The people, desperate for an explanation and a remedy, would turn to the witch doctor, whose solutions invariably involved violence, ritual ending of life, or banishment. The lives of innocent people, often those accused of witchcraft, hung in the balance. Mary's spiritual battle was therefore a battle for practical health and safety. When she heard of a chief in a distant, often hostile village who was gravely ill, she understood the stakes were far higher than one man's life. If the chief passed under a supposed curse, his wives, slaves, and suspected enemies would often have their lives ended to appease the offended spirits or to accompany him into the afterlife. To save the chief was to save dozens of vulnerable lives from the ritual ending of life. Imagine the scene: a long, arduous journey, perhaps through torrential rain, following only a whispered message that a chief was passing. Mary would set out immediately, driven by the urgency of the moment. She would walk for hours, her small body trembling with effort, facing not only the natural perils of the jungle, wild animals, and deep streams, but the human threat of armed warriors protecting their sick leader from supposed spiritual attack. Upon arrival, she faced an atmosphere thick with fear and suspicion. The witch doctors, recognizing a challenge to their authority, would often oppose her, performing frantic, loud rituals meant to intimidate. But Mary, armed with her Efik language mastery and her small medicine chest, remained unflinching. Her calm, collected presence was a powerful counterforce to their manufactured chaos. She did not seek to immediately disparage the local beliefs. Instead, she provided tangible, undeniable healing. Having examined the chief, she would administer the basic, scientifically sound medicines she carried: a treatment for fever, an antiseptic for a wound, a simple, effective remedy. This was the genius of her approach. She fought spiritual fear with practical kindness, showing that the God she served was a God of order, sense, and true healing. Once, when treating a chief, Mary realized she needed a specific drug she didn't have. She ordered one of the local men to travel to a distant mission for the medicine. The man refused, terrified, explaining that the journey required crossing a river guarded by hostile tribes who would certainly end his life. Mary, with a usual blend of fierce faith and determination, simply stated that his life was in God's hands and that the risk was necessary to save the chief and prevent mass ending of life. A calm conviction eventually persuaded a man to agree to go, and he returned safely, the medicine in hand. The successful recovery of a chief was a monumental visible victory for the gospel. It proved that Mary's power, The juju of the White Mother, as some began to call it, was superior to the local spirits. It was a power that brought life, not ending, healing, not vengeance. The people watched as the fever broke and the chief returned to health, realizing that the fear that had dictated their lives was based on a deception. Mary Slessor was not just treating diseases, she was treating the spiritual bondage that led to brutality. By saving lives and mediating peace, she was preparing the ground for the seeds of faith. The very moment a chief or an elder agreed to declare the custom of destruction of a child at birth unlawful, or agreed to settle a dispute peacefully, was a moment when the dominion of the juju receded and the quiet, strong rule of the King of Kings advanced. This direct, personal confrontation with the forces of darkness, always resolved through quiet persistence and pragmatic kindness, was the spiritual heartbeat of her mission. She relied on the promises of Scripture, knowing that the light always overcomes the darkness. Mary Slessor, the quiet warrior, had repeatedly risked her life to show the Okoyong that God's love was stronger than any curse. Having secured a measure of physical safety and legal peace, her indomitable spirit would soon urge her again toward the very edges of the known map, where a new type of pioneer work awaited. The lure of the interior, pushing past the border, for Mary Slessor, the quiet, immense green of the jungle always held the ultimate challenge. Though she had established a mission, mediated peace, and secured legal authority, she could not rest. Her gaze was perpetually fixed on the vast, unexplored map that stretched inland, knowing that beyond the Okoyong lay the Aro people and others, cannibalistic tribes locked in even deeper spiritual darkness. This persistent yearning to push past the established border was the truest echo of the pioneer spirit that had first drawn her to David Livingstone's call. She understood that the gospel was not meant to be contained within a safe radius. It was a fire that must spread until it touched the very ends of the earth. But this inner urge was met with a constant, practical barrier: responsibility. Mary was a mother to a large, vulnerable family of adopted twins and orphans, and she was the only dependable judge and teacher for the Okoyong region. She could not simply abandon the fragile peace and the precious lives she had painstakingly nurtured. Her commitment to the established mission was a profound exercise in self-denial, a moment where her adventurous heart had to submit to the necessity of loyalty and patient service. For years, she carried the burden of the interior in her prayers. She knew the Aro people were intelligent, cunning, and heavily invested in the slave trade, using the fear of the infamous Long Juju Shrine to dominate large swaths of territory. She knew that to venture, there was to enter a den of commerce, cruelty, and deeply entrenched spiritual warfare. She spoke openly about her desire to go, even receiving cordial but cautious invitations from Aro traders she encountered, who hinted that the trip might not be safe. She often sought help, requesting 2 missionary ladies from the mission board to come and staff the Okoyong station so she could be free to move further inland. But the resources were scarce and the personnel were few. She waited year after year, loyally submitting to the seemingly mundane tasks of teaching, tending, and arbitrating, all the while knowing her true calling lay beyond the horizon. This period of forced waiting was perhaps one of the most spiritually demanding times of her life. It is easier to be brave in the midst of a crisis than it is to be faithful in the face of stagnation. She recognized this struggle in herself and saw it in other missionaries who became discontent, morose, or cynical when deprived of the excitement of pioneer work. Mary's faith provided her constant anchor. She redefined her existence, teaching herself that every task, however secular or small, was God's work for the moment. The patience required to settle a boundary dispute or teach a child to read was just as holy as confronting a warlord. She wrote in her correspondence, reminding herself and others that a mission house, even in its humdrum days, offers a magnificent opportunity of service to the King. This steadfast loyalty in the quiet years proved her character. She focused on deepening the foundations of the existing Okoyong community, establishing a basic economy through legitimate trade and encouraging better relationships between surrounding tribes. This groundwork ensured that when the gospel finally moved deeper, it would move from a place of strength and stability rather than chaos. Her vision for the interior was clear. She did not see a people beyond redemption. Despite the appalling barbarism and the cruelty she knew existed, Mary firmly believed that there were no people who could not be recreated. Her faith was in the transformative power of God's grace, regardless of the darkness of the culture. This unwavering hope in the potential of the unreached kept the flame of the pioneer burning inside her, even when her body was held fast by duty. Eventually, the door opened. With the arrival of more stable support and the growing maturity of her adopted children, Mary prepared for a new phase. She acquired a practical new tool for her advancing age, a bicycle, allowing the intrepid missionary to cover ground more quickly than a lifetime of walking. She began to venture out on small, exploratory trips, testing the waters, inching toward the land of the Aro people. She was driven by the knowledge that in the deep, silent interior, countless men, women, and children were still imprisoned by fear and the bondage of the slave trade. Her spiritual mission was to bring the truth of freedom to a land where human life was a mere commodity. Mary Slessor, the pioneer, now prepared to discard her last European comforts to truly integrate herself with the land, adopting a lifestyle of radical simplicity, the aroma of simple faith, living like a native. To truly dwell among the people, one must discard the walls of comfort and culture. Mary Slessor understood that the most powerful sermon she could preach was not with her words, but with a simple, sacrificial way of life. She refused to allow the privileges of her Scottish origin to separate her from the struggles of the Efik and Okoyong people. Imagine the missionaries who arrived in West Africa cloaked in the heavy customs of the Victorian era. They often built solid European-style houses, wore cumbersome, layered clothing, and relied on imported food and meticulous sanitation to maintain a familiar lifestyle. They sought to shield themselves from the very environment they were sent to transform. Mary chose a profoundly different path, one that mirrored the humility of Christ himself. Her dwelling was a simple, unpretentious mud hut, often made of mud walls with a thatched roof. It offered basic shelter but little comfort. This choice was deliberate. By sharing the material reality of the people, she dissolved the distance created by wealth and culture. There was no need for a visitor to pass through elaborate doors or sit in stiff chairs. They met her on equal ground. Her daily routine was a continuous act of contextualization. She chose to wear simple, lightweight garments, practical for the intense, damp heat, shedding the restrictive dresses of Europe. She cut her distinctive red hair short. She ate the local food, subsisting on the same basic provisions as her neighbors. She chose to walk barefoot often, preferring the earth under her feet to the stiffness of leather boots, a detail that spoke volumes about her connection to the land and its people. These were not merely eccentric habits, they were spiritual disciplines. By shunning Western precautions like mosquito nets and elaborate water filters, she opened herself up to the very diseases and discomforts that plagued the locals. She bore the heat, the constant insects, and the recurrent aches with patience, believing that this shared suffering provided profound spiritual authority. The people knew she was not a temporary visitor. She was a resident, fully invested in their world. This radical identification demonstrated that her motivation was pure love, not colonial ambition or a desire for comfort. Her life was an open book, showing that her power derived not from the might of the British Empire, but from the sustaining power of the great I Am. The fact that this small, perpetually working woman survived and thrived in the white man's grave, often against all odds, was a continuous miracle, witnessed daily by the tribes. Her physical simplicity was matched by her spiritual contentment. Despite the constant worries of caring for her large adopted family, mediating disputes, and facing danger, Mary Slessor found a deep, abiding joy in her poverty. She was often heard expressing profound gratitude, finding beauty and grace in the smallest details of her strenuous life. The arrival of a new, simple flower, a break in the fever, or the healthy laughter of a rescued twin were treasures she cherished more than any European luxury. This contentment allowed her to maintain an unwavering focus on the eternal. She was not distracted by the pursuit of material possessions or the maintenance of social status. Her energy was entirely devoted to healing, teaching, and sharing the gospel. She demonstrated that Christian faith was a path to freedom, freedom from fear, freedom from the bondage of ritual, and freedom from the relentless pursuit of comfort. This simple life ultimately made her a better missionary. She did not preach down to the people. She shared the gospel alongside them, working side by side in the dirt and the heat. When she spoke of God's provision, the people knew it was genuine because they witnessed her relying on that very provision day after day, living by faith, not by bank account. She became a model of practical holiness, showing that true godliness transforms hardship into a profound, life-giving connection. Mary Slessor, the woman who chose a mud hut over a comfortable home, created a sacred space in the Okoyong wilderness. She proved that the kingdom of God advances not with armies or architects, but with humble servants willing to discard their privilege and embrace vulnerability. Her aroma was not of European perfume, but the sweat and soil of a shared, beloved life. She had successfully rooted herself in the Okoyong, planting the seeds of faith in fertile ground. Yet, the price of this profound identification was constant exposure, and even the greatest faith must contend with the realities of the body, leading to the ultimate trial: the burden of the flesh, malaria, and unwavering return. The greatest adversary in the African interior was not the armed warrior or the cunning witch doctor, but the microscopic enemy carried by the sighing, high-pitched mosquito. For Mary Slessor, the persistent threat of malaria was the constant, unseen tax demanded by the West African climate, a relentless battle waged in the fevered silence of her small hut. Imagine the onset of the disease, the sudden, paralyzing chill, followed by the burning, racking fever that consumes the body and steals the mind. The strength that allowed Mary to walk for hours and face down warring chiefs would be instantly diminished, leaving her weak, nauseous, and often delirious. Her body, constantly exposed through her radical choice to live like the locals, without mosquito nets or protective colonial compounds, paid a terrible, repetitive price. Yet, Mary Slessor's response to this debilitating illness was not defeat, but a profound demonstration of God's sustaining grace. While many European missionaries succumbed to the climate and returned home permanently, Mary treated each illness as a temporary setback, a necessary pause in the rhythm of her life's work. She believed that her weakness served a spiritual purpose, revealing that the work continued not because of her own inherent strength, but because of the power of the God who sent her. On several occasions, the fever became so severe and her exhaustion so complete that she was forced to concede to the pleas of her colleagues and return to Scotland for recovery. Picture the long voyage home, her body frail and ravaged, leaving behind the chaotic, beloved family she had adopted. These returns were not retreats, but rather refueling stations. She used the cold, clean air of Scotland to recover her physical strength, but her heart remained entirely fixed on the vibrant, needy land she considered her true home. Her visits back to Scotland often served a dual purpose: to regain her health and to share the vivid, challenging reality of the mission field. She would stand before groups in churches and town halls, the red-headed mill girl turned African judge, sharing not romantic tales, but the hard, factual truths of life, loss, and redemption in Calabar. Her stories, told with fierce conviction and simple sincerity, stirred the hearts of many, inspiring financial support and a new wave of missionaries. The true test of her faith, however, was the unwavering return. As soon as her health permitted, Mary would begin the long journey back to the Okoyong. She did not delay, nor did she allow the renewed comforts of her homeland to tempt her away from the mission. She traveled light, carrying few possessions, but a profound determination to reunite with her children and continue the struggle against darkness. Her return was always a powerful, visible commitment to the Okoyong people. She had not abandoned them. As the years passed and Mary's age advanced, the physical burden became even heavier. The recurring bouts of malaria left her with chronic health issues, including painful and debilitating rheumatoid arthritis. This crippling condition made the once easy task of trekking through the forest for hours a truly agonizing effort. The woman who once confronted armed men with physical force was now reduced to needing assistance to walk. Yet, the spirit within her remained utterly undimmed. When she could no longer walk long distances, she adapted. She acquired a handcart, a simple, man-powered conveyance pushed by her assistants, allowing her to continue moving between the villages and presiding over her court sessions. Later, she even learned to ride a bicycle to cover the challenging terrain more quickly, a testament to her pragmatic persistence in the face of physical decline. Her constant struggle with illness became a deep spiritual lesson for the people she served. They saw that her life was not one of effortless magic, but of perseverance through suffering. This shared vulnerability deepened their connection. They witnessed a God who did not miraculously shield his servant from all pain, but who sustained her through it. Mary Slessor's weakness magnified God's strength, showing that the power of the gospel was resilient even when the body was failing. In her final decades, Mary knew her time was limited. She recorded her work and her thoughts in her personal diaries, interspersing practical notes on school attendance and village disputes with profound, simple expressions of faith, often written late at night while struggling with fever. Even when her mind was clouded by delirium, she believed she was making powerful sermons and delivering them, a testament to the unceasing devotion of her soul. Mary Slessor, the veteran of countless skirmishes with the fever, had endured the relentless toll of the tropics for nearly 4 decades. Her body was broken, but her will was whole, sustained by an inner flame. She proved that courage is not the absence of fear or pain, but the unwavering return to the place of service, leaning entirely on God's strength. The burdens of the flesh were heavy, but the weight of her mission remained her priority. Her life had demonstrated God's miraculous presence in every moment of trial, and soon her final physical struggle would give way to the spiritual provision that never failed. The great I Am's provision, the promise kept in the remote heart of the Okoyong, far removed from any bank or established supply chain. A practical question constantly haunted the mission. How will we eat tomorrow? Mary Slessor, with her growing family of adopted twins, her schools, and her medical work, carried not only the spiritual burden of a region, but the massive, continuous weight of material necessity. Yet, the remarkable truth of Mary's 4 decades in Africa was that her work never failed due to a lack of resources. This was the quiet, constant miracle of her mission. God's provision, a testament to the fact that the King who sends his servant will also sustain her. Her faith was anchored in the identity of the God revealed to Moses at the burning bush. I am the self-sufficient, ever-present being. Mary's prayers for provision were as direct and unadorned as her life. When money was low, or when a shipment of much-needed medical supplies was delayed, she did not panic or appeal to distant bureaucracy. She simply laid the need before God, declaring her mission to be a royal mission, and therefore the responsibility of the King of Kings. Her confidence was absolute, rooted in the biblical promise that those who seek first the kingdom of God will have all their necessities supplied. This simple faith was essential because Mary was a missionary who actively rejected financial security. She deliberately lived on a meager stipend, choosing to use any surplus money to directly support the rescued children and the local educational projects, rather than investing in her own comfort or European-style housing. She spent her money as quickly as it came in, confident that tomorrow's need would be met just as surely as today's. Her financial stability, therefore, rested entirely upon the generosity of the people she had inspired back in Scotland. Her letters home, vivid and factual accounts of the life and loss struggle in Okoyong, were powerful calls to action. She wrote not as a beggar, but as a field reporter, conveying the desperate need of the children and the undeniable triumph of the gospel. These letters were eagerly read and shared, opening the hearts of Scottish Presbyterians who were moved to send funds, clothing, and supplies across the ocean. Imagine the scene. A supply canoe finally arrives at her remote station. Within the crates and bundles are the precise items she had prayed for: a roll of cloth for the children's school uniforms, simple reading books, a fresh supply of quinine to fight the fever. These arrivals were not coincidences, they were miracles of timeliness, reinforcing her conviction that she was being constantly watched over and supplied by the great I Am. Every unexpected shilling that arrived, every bag of corn that appeared at her doorstep, was a visible sign of God's faithfulness. Mary saw this provision as a key evangelical tool. She was able to teach the local people about the generosity of a God who cares for the smallest details of their lives, providing for the needs of the children the tribal gods had cursed. The contrast was stark. The traditional gods demanded sacrifice and fear, while the Christian God offered unearned, graceful provision. The support was never just financial, it was logistical and emotional. Mary's adopted children, like Janie, required schooling and care that she could not always provide on her own. God, in His providence, raised up dedicated local Efik families and later supportive European colleagues to share the immense daily burden of child-rearing and education. This network of care was the tangible hand of God at work, fulfilling the needs of the mother of all people when she was stretched beyond her limits. Even in times of severe illness, her physical survival was a testament to provision. When she was too weak to move, her devoted adopted daughters and local assistants would care for her, administering medicine, managing the children, and ensuring the mission did not halt. These faithful servants, often themselves rescued from slavery or loss, were God's chosen instruments to sustain His missionary. Mary Slessor's life stripped away all pretense of human control. She never claimed to be an astute financial planner or a great organizer. She confessed to being no organizer and actively disliked routine work. Yet, by placing her mission entirely on the altar of God's responsibility, she ensured its lasting success. Her work flourished because its source of power and provision was divine, not earthly. She taught that true security is not found in stockpiled supplies, but in the certainty that God is always present and always sufficient. The great I Am proved to be Mary's dependable banker, her supply chain, and her ever-present protector. She'd spent a lifetime relying on His promise, knowing that the God who spoke to Moses from the fire would not abandon His servant in the wilderness. Mary Slessor, the woman of simple faith, had received her sustenance from an invisible source. Her entire life was a demonstration that God honors the prayers of the faithful servant. As her strength waned and her time in the physical world drew to a close, she was prepared to rest, knowing the promise of her God was fulfilled. The time for labor was nearly over, and the final endurance of her body would soon begin. The final outpost, tending sheep on Horeb's backside. The wilderness can be the place of powerful revelation, but also the ground of quiet endurance. Just as Moses, in his later years, tended sheep on the backside of Mount Horeb, finding faithful service far from the palace, Mary Slessor spent her final decades pressing toward the edges of the map, her heart still blazing, though her body was growing cold. This was her final outpost, the wilderness of Ikpe and Odoro Ikpe. Mary's physical decline, chronicled in her own precise, simple hand, was a constant, unwelcome companion. The cumulative toll of years spent battling malaria, sleeping in damp huts, drinking unfiltered water, and trekking through the swampy heat began to manifest in crippling rheumatoid arthritis and chronic fever. The relentless pain turned the simple act of walking into a monumental act of will. Yet, This diminishment of the flesh did not diminish her mission. It only changed her methodology. The pioneer spirit, the tireless urge to reach the unreached, remained. She adapted, acquiring the bicycle for short distances and relying on the handcart, gently pushed by her adopted sons and assistants, for longer journeys between the distant villages she had founded. The image of the legendary White Queen being slowly conveyed by her own rescued children is a powerful, visual testament to the reversal of fortune brought by the gospel. The formerly weak were now supporting the once strong. Her life during these final years was marked by an extraordinary focus on the daily rhythm of duty. She was simultaneously managing 3 mission stations, Use, Ikpe, and Odoro Ikpe, each requiring teaching, healing, arbitration, and spiritual guidance. Her days began and ended with the needs of the people, demonstrating a commitment that transcended her physical agony. The most poignant record of this final, quiet perseverance is found in her personal diary, written often in the middle of the night, sometimes by the flickering light of a candle stuck in its own crease. These entries are a powerful, raw blend of mundane reality and profound spiritual truth. She recorded the small, hard details of mission life, juxtaposed against moments of unexpected grace. Left the beach for Ikpe in the evening, sailed in moonlight, reached Ikpe 4 p.m. next day, ran onto a tree. Boys were thrown into the water. Very feeble, scarcely able to stand upright in church. Horrid night, with cross-child. Lovely letters from dear ones. God is very good to me. Exhausted, 2 women had their lives ended on the way from the market and their heads removed. Fever, trying to make meat safe. These stark sentences reveal the constant, exhausting contrast that defined her life. Moments of profound danger and deep sorrow were immediately followed by small acts of God's kindness. The brutal reality of unlawful taking of life and tribal violence was countered by the simple joy of a child clothed for the first time, or the beauty of a freshly cut rose from her garden, a tender gift from God. She worked diligently on establishing her final home at her last outpost, a difficult process due to her own feebleness and the tendency of local laborers to succumb to heat and talk. This physical struggle to simply build a house became a final lesson in patience, a reminder that the work of the kingdom is often slow, arduous, and requires constant, faithful supervision. She learned to embrace the quiet, persistent rhythm, knowing that even in her brokenness, she was still the one guiding the work forward. Despite the growing disabilities, failing eyesight, and encroaching deafness, Mary never ceased to engage. She continued to serve as a judge and advocate, her keen mind and profound knowledge of the local people compensating for her physical frailty. Her wisdom was her lasting authority, trusted by both the colonial officials and the indigenous chiefs. She held court and gave counsel even from her bed, her presence remaining a binding force for peace in a volatile land. Her dedication inspired generations. During one trip, while resting at a government rest house high on Odoro Ikpe Hill, she found immense solace. Gazing over the wide, dim plain under the cool, fresh wind, she was overwhelmed by gratitude, despite being a physical wreck, aching, weary, and lonely. She wrote that she could not fathom why God had so highly honored and trusted her. This humility, this simple astonishment at God's grace, was the secret to her unwavering commitment. Mary Slessor, the woman of fierce conviction, found her final purpose in the simple, repetitive acts of service. She understood that faithfulness is often defined not by dramatic confrontations, but by tending the sheep in the quiet, demanding corners of the world, relying entirely on the strength of the unseen God. The final years were a testament to her foundational conviction that the King of Kings would sustain her to the end. She was worn out from service, her body spent, but her spirit, alight with the love of the gospel, remained steadfast. The time for struggle was finally reaching its end. Having poured out her life as a living water for the land she adopted, Mary Slessor was nearing the rest she had so faithfully earned. The final prayer would soon be offered, marking the passage of the pioneer to the peace of the great I Am. The final storm, the Aro expedition, and enduring peace. Mary Slessor's mission was a pioneering act of spiritual and social resistance, but the customs she fought were deeply entrenched, upheld by powerful political and commercial structures. The practice of destruction of a child at birth, ritual ending of a person's life, and the widespread slave trade were all sustained by the spiritual and economic dominion of the Aro Confederacy and their oracle, the Long Juju. While Mary's relentless effort and legal appointment as vice consul provided local control, the Aro influence, which stretched far beyond the Okoyong, remained a persistent shadow on the map. This shadow was finally lifted by a definitive, if controversial, military action that provided the necessary secular foundation for the lasting peace she had begun. The dominion of the Long Juju. The Aro people, centered around their powerful oracle at Arochukwu, had established an enormous sphere of influence over centuries, governing trade, justice, and spiritual life through fear. The Long Juju was not merely a shrine, it was a complex system of economic and judicial control. When local disputes arose, or when accusations of witchcraft were made, the accused was sent on a pilgrimage to the oracle. In reality, this process was a lucrative, often fatal, judicial spectacle. The victims, or those who were judged guilty by the oracle, either had their lives ended as a form of ritual offering, often to accompany a past chief or appease spirits, or, more commonly, secretly sold into the slave trade. The oracle's priests would claim the victim was swallowed by the juju, concealing the truth from the community and maintaining the oracle's terrifying reputation. This system thus perpetuated the mass ending of life, while simultaneously generating immense wealth and maintaining the Aro's economic and spiritual supremacy across the hinterland. Mary Slessor knew that true, lasting social reform and peace required dismantling the very mechanism that sustained this terror. The British response and the final confrontation. By the turn of the 20th century, the British colonial government, having formalized the Protectorate of Southern Nigeria, viewed the Aro system as the single greatest impediment to peaceful trade, administration, and the final abolition of slavery. The Aro had successfully resisted British incursion for decades, often using their influence to incite tribal resistance. The decision was finally made to confront the oracle directly. In November 1901, the British launched the Aro expedition, a large-scale, two-pronged military operation involving over 5,000 African soldiers led by European officers. Their goal was explicit: to destroy the Arochukwu oracle and permanently break the Aro Confederacy's dominion. The expedition faced fierce, coordinated resistance from the Aro and their allies, engaging in several substantial battles that resulted in heavy casualties on both sides. The military campaign lasted for several months, culminating in the capture and destruction of the Longjuju Shrine in December 1901 and the final subjugation of the Aro resistance by early 1902. This military action, though a brutal act of colonization, directly achieved what decades of missionary effort could not on its own. It removed the spiritual and commercial foundation of the slave trade and the customary ending of a person's life across a massive region. Mary Slessor's shifting role in the aftermath. Mary Slessor, who fiercely opposed violence and war, was not a participant in the expedition, but she was a crucial beneficiary and stabilizer in its aftermath. The destruction of the oracle, combined with the new legal framework she had already established, created an immediate and irreversible shift in the region's social structure. With the dominant source of fear and judicial terror gone, the work of the gospel advanced at an accelerated pace. Mary's unlawful ending of life court cases now had the ultimate backing of the colonial power, making her local pronouncements against ritual disposal of infants and slavery instantly enforceable across the newly pacified territories. Her final years, up until her passing in 1915, was spent consolidating this peace. She shifted from being the radical intercessor to the established administrator. She oversaw the creation of new trade routes, encouraged legitimate commerce, and most importantly, established scores of new schools and churches in the areas newly freed from Aro's influence. This was the peace she had dreamed of, a peace secured not by her own physical power, but by the ultimate destruction of the oppressive spiritual system. The enduring legacy of Eka Kapukpru over Mary Slessor's life is a profound study in the necessity of both spiritual conviction and practical, even legal, power. She used her faith to challenge the old customs, her linguistic mastery to connect with the people, and her legal authority to enforce the sanctity of life. The deliberate destruction of a child at birth had been vanquished not only by her rescue of twins, but by the collapse of the belief system that commanded it, replaced by a legal system built upon her moral authority. Her legacy is therefore not just one of a woman who risked her life for a cause, but a pioneer who created a framework for permanent social change. The schools, hospitals, and churches she established continue to thrive today across the states of Akwa Ibom and Cross River in Nigeria. She is remembered not for her European origins, but for her profound humanity and courage, the mother of all the people who proved that the love of Christ is a force stronger than any juju, greater than any army, and more enduring than any colonial power. The weight of the calling, loneliness, and self-doubt, while Mary Slessor projected an image of indomitable courage and unwavering faith, her private life was often shadowed by the profound burden of her calling. Her dedication to the Okoyong people required a radical form of isolation that few modern minds can grasp. She lived alone, miles from the nearest European mission station, surrounded by a culture that, while growing to respect her, remained spiritually and often politically alien. This proximity to constant danger, coupled with immense responsibility, extracted a heavy personal cost. Mary endured years of intense loneliness. She was a single woman in an era when companionship and marriage were the expected pillars of a woman's life. She carried the fierce, maternal love of a mother, poured into her adopted children, but she lacked the support system of a spouse or partner. She often spent months, sometimes years, without the company of another European woman or man with whom she could share the nuanced burdens of administration and theology in her native tongue. Her only confidant was God, accessed through constant prayer and recorded in her diary. She also battled periods of significant self-doubt and depression. Despite her great successes, she remained acutely aware of her humble beginnings and her lack of formal education. In her correspondence, she sometimes expressed feeling inadequate for the monumental tasks God had laid upon her, especially when dealing with complex diplomatic issues or the logistical nightmares of supplies and finances. She worried that her unconventional methods, her simple hut, her adopted children, her barefoot treks, were viewed with disdain by the more orthodox, rigid missionaries back in Calabar. This inner struggle was perhaps her deepest spiritual battle. She wrestled with the tension between her own fragile humanity and the absolute perfection of the God she served. A constant return to service, despite the physical and emotional exhaustion, became the greatest proof of her reliance on the great I Am. She taught that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it, leaning entirely on divine power. She never allowed her personal loneliness to become a barrier to her ministry, transforming her isolation into fuel for her relentless dedication to the lost. Building the future. Educational and economic foundations. Mary Slessor knew that the work of the gospel could not survive solely on rescues and court judgments. To create a truly self-sustaining Christian community, she had to invest in education and economic structure. Her mission was as much about building schools as it was about saving souls. Her schools, though primitive by European standards, often consisting of a mud hut with benches and a blackboard, were revolutionary for the Okoyong. She insisted on a practical curriculum that went beyond mere literacy. Boys and girls were taught reading, writing, and basic arithmetic, essential skills for trade and self-governance. She used her own few books and her Bible as textbooks, ensuring the foundation of their knowledge was spiritual. Crucially, Mary focused intently on vocational skills. She taught the children and young adults carpentry, agriculture, and needlework. This was a deliberate effort to sever the region's dependency on the slave trade. By teaching them how to grow cash crops or produce marketable goods, she provided them with a new, ethical means of livelihood. Economic freedom, she believed, was an essential component of spiritual freedom. She also pioneered a system of local leadership. Unlike many missionaries who maintained strict control, Mary sought out, trained, and empowered local Efik and Okoyong teachers and evangelists. She saw them as the true, long-term inheritors of the mission. She entrusted them with the daily running of the schools and smaller outposts, often while she was away presiding over court or managing disputes. This commitment to indigenous leadership ensured that the mission would not collapse after her passing, a profound, strategic decision that speaks to her humility and foresight. The result of this holistic approach was a visible, tangible change in the community. The Okoyong villages began to flourish under the rule of law and the stability of a cash economy. The children she educated became the first native nurses, clerks, and teachers in the region, forming the backbone of the nascent civil society that replaced the brutal tribal structures. Mary Slessor was not just a rescuer. She was an architect of a new, ethical society. The tightrope walk, mission, and colonialism. Mary Slessor's life spanned a critical period where the lines between Christian mission and colonial expansion were deeply blurred. Her appointment as vice consul placed her squarely on the ethical tightrope of this era. She was, simultaneously, an agent of the gospel and an agent of the British Crown. Mary's genius lay in her ability to leverage the colonial system for humanitarian ends while fiercely resisting its inherent arrogance and brutality. She accepted the title of vice consul only because it granted her the legal authority to abolish the destruction of a child at birth, stop tribal wars, and protect women and children from slavery, things the church alone lacked the temporal power to do. She used the crown's power to enforce God's compassion, often acting as a buffer between the local people and the more aggressive colonial officers. She was outspoken in her criticism of colonial excesses. She rejected the Pax Britannica ideal when it came at the cost of local dignity. She opposed the aggressive acquisition of land and the exploitation of local labor. Her radical way of life, living simply, speaking the native language, and rejecting European comforts, was, in itself, a powerful protest against the cultural and racial supremacy often accompanying colonial rule. She sought to implant the kingdom of God, not the British Empire. Mary always maintained that her authority came from the Efik people's trust and from God, not from London. Her judicial process reflected this. She listened to both sides, used Efik proverbs, and applied common sense and moral law rather than strict English legal statutes. This earned her a rare status. She was both respected by the colonial government for maintaining order and loved by the indigenous people for her fairness and protection. She successfully transformed the office of vice consul into an office of service and spiritual advocacy rather than one of political domination. The spiritual roots of cruelty. Unpacking the fear, to understand Mary's extraordinary courage, one must appreciate the depth of the spiritual darkness she challenged. The customs of destruction of a child at birth and ritual ending of a person's life were not acts of gratuitous evil, but deeply ritualized responses to pervasive, debilitating fear rooted in their cosmology. For the Okoyong and Efik, the world was governed by capricious spirits, ancestors, and a constant, volatile interplay of good and evil magic, juju. Their greatest fear was not loss of life itself, but spiritual contamination that could bring famine, disease, or communal disaster. Twin births, destruction of a child at birth. The birth of twins was seen as evidence of bestiality or a grave, hidden sin by the mother, meaning one infant was fathered by an evil spirit. Since they could not discern which baby was the demon, both had to be ended to protect the entire community from the curse. It was an act of desperate communal self-preservation driven by terror. Passing of a chief, ritual ending of a person's life. When a chief passed away, the belief was that his spirit required servants and companions in the afterlife. The ceremonial ending of a person's life, often wives, slaves, or those accused of poisoning, was considered an act of duty to ensure the chief's spirit could transition successfully and not remain on earth to torment the living. To refuse the ritual ending was to invite the wrath of the ancestral spirit upon the entire village. Mary's gospel message was revolutionary because it offered a complete solution to this fear. She introduced a God who was not capricious or vengeful, but protective and loving. She did not merely condemn the practices, she directly addressed the underlying fear. By raising the twins, she proved the curse was a lie. By intervening in wars, she proved the God of peace was stronger than the spirits of vengeance. Her work was a daily, practical refutation of their cosmology, replacing the fear of the juju with the peace of the great I Am. The art of Okoyong justice. Arbitration in the native court, Mary Slessor's greatest test of wisdom, came in the native courts, where she served as vice consul. She wasn't just enforcing law, she was performing a high-wire act of diplomacy, ethics, and cultural exchange. Her primary task was to deliver justice that was both fair by European standards and understandable by Okoyong tradition. The problem of the poison test. Before Mary's court, criminal and land disputes were often settled by the Sassawood ordeal, a judicial process relying on poison that allowed the powerful to eliminate rivals through fatal criminal ending of life. When Mary took a seat beneath the palaver tree, her first victory was simply replacing the Sassawood with reason and testimony. In one famous case, a powerful chief was accused of using witchcraft to blight his rival's crops. The accuser demanded the Sassawood test. Mary refused. Instead, she had the two chiefs sit opposite her, insisting they recount every detail of the land boundary dispute, not the witchcraft accusation. She brought in witnesses from neutral tribes, cross-examined the claims about the blight, and eventually determined the initial land markers had been moved by a small flood. Her verdict was simple. The land was to be remarked, the blighted chief compensated with food from the accused stores, and both chiefs were to shake hands and share a meal. Her judgment focused on restorative justice and communal harmony rather than vengeance. The people watched her apply logic to situations they thought only magic could resolve, and in doing so, they began to trust her system, protecting women and property. Her court became the only safe haven for women. Traditionally, a woman was considered the property of her husband's family, lacking rights to inheritance or divorce. Mary fought fiercely for fair settlements in matrimonial disputes and ensured widows, who were often cast out or faced ending of life to accompany their deceased husbands, retained their dowry goods and land rights. She used the judicial process not only to punish crimes, but to teach legality. She maintained detailed written records of her decisions, showing the chiefs and elders exactly how the new system worked. This created a body of common law in the Okoyong, slowly replacing arbitrary rule with predictable justice. She understood that fairness was the fastest way to embed Christian principles into the secular life of the tribe, creating a profound, lasting impact where generations would rely on her legal framework. The constant threat to the judge serving as a judge came with a constant, specific threat that the loser of a case would seek retribution via poison or ambush. Mary never kept a guard and often traveled alone. Her simple defense was her absolute, open faith. She often stated, "I'm on the king's business," publicly declaring that her protector was infinitely stronger than any vengeful chief or witch doctor. This unwavering conviction was not reckless. It was a pragmatic demonstration that the source of her authority was incorruptible, ensuring the integrity of the Okoyong judiciary remained intact. The shadow of personal sacrifice, grief, and isolation behind the public persona of the fearless, red-headed White Queen lay a woman who was perpetually acquainted with profound loss and sorrow. Mary Slessor's mission was built upon a mountain of personal sacrifice and endured periods of staggering grief that would have broken a lesser soul. The tragedy of the adopted children. Mary's greatest joy was her adopted children, but they were also the source of her deepest, most agonizing pain. The reality of life in the white man's grave meant that sickness was a constant thief. She lost several children she had dearly loved and saved, infants who succumbed to fever, malaria, or the lasting effects of their exposure in the bush. Each loss was a fresh, personal wound, forcing her to bury a piece of her own heart in the African soil. She famously recorded the passing of one twin, saying, "I have carried 8 infants who perished out of the bush and seen them buried, but this one I could not help." Her grief was intensely private, often managed alone in her hut after a long day of public service. These losses forced her to constantly reconcile the saving power of her faith with the brutal reality of the tropical environment, strengthening her resolve to fight the sources of disease and cultural destruction of a child at birth. The lost dream of companionship, Mary's dedication to her work led her to reject marriage, viewing a husband as an impediment to the freedom and danger her pioneer spirit required. However, the cost of this choice was profound loneliness. She often wrote with poignant honesty about the simple yearning for companionship, a friendly face, or a shared burden. The Mission Society occasionally sent out female assistants to help her, but many could not endure Mary's radical lifestyle, the constant illness, or the lack of comfort. They quickly left, leaving Mary to face the wilderness alone again. This cycle of brief hope, followed by renewed isolation, was a constant spiritual drain. She poured her need for love into her Efik family and her work, transforming her isolation into the immense capacity for maternal love that earned her the title Eka Kapukpru Owo. She endured the loneliness so that the abandoned might know they were loved. The shadow of her past. Despite the public respect she commanded, Mary carried the lasting psychological scars of her childhood. This memory of her father's alcoholism and the desperate poverty of Dundee instilled in her a deep compassion for the oppressed, but also a persistent fear of failure and a deep-seated dislike of male authority figures who abused their power. This fear fueled her relentless work ethic and her unique ability to stand firm against aggressive chiefs and condescending colonial officers. Her courage was not born of ease, but forged in the terror of her youth, transforming her personal trauma into a boundless spiritual authority that demanded respect from the very men who often reminded her of her dysfunctional past. Her life was an enduring testament to redemption, proof that even the deepest personal wounds can be healed and harnessed for divine purpose. Final years and succession. The indigenization of the mission. As Mary Slessor's physical strength waned, her strategic focus sharpened. She knew that the true measure of her success was not the number of converts she made or the complexity of the laws she enforced, but the sustainability of the mission after her departure. Her final years were dedicated entirely to the transfer of spiritual and administrative authority to the indigenous people she had trained. Training the future. The local catechists, Mary had an almost unparalleled dedication to empowering local leadership. She did not seek out highly educated, westernized converts. Instead, she chose catechists and teachers from the local Efik and Okoyong communities, men and women who understood the Juju fears, spoke the language flawlessly, and lived life. Her most trusted successors, such as Chief Adam, who assisted in her court, and her adopted daughters, who ran the schools, were the heart of her succession plan. She taught them not merely dogma, but the application of Christian ethics to tribal law and communal disputes. She insisted they lead services, manage the small mission economies, and arbitrate local issues. Even while she was still alive, she placed the future of the Okoyong Church firmly in African hands, believing deeply in the capacity of the people for self-governance and spiritual leadership. This foresight prevented the mission from collapsing, a common fate for missions heavily dependent on a single charismatic European leader. In her final years, Mary continued to move to the very edge of the British-controlled territory, establishing her last posts in the remote villages of Ikpe and Odoro Ikpe. Even crippled by arthritis, her spirit refused to be contained by the known map. She used a bicycle and a handcart, determined to bring the light of the gospel to those still living in fear and darkness. These last posts became the ultimate demonstration of her belief that the mission must always move forward, always toward the unreached. The legacy of the humble Mary Slessor consistently deflected praise and refused to romanticize her life. She believed her greatest legacy was simple. She had stayed, she had loved, and she had trusted God. Her life, starting in the deafening clatter of a Dundee mill and ending in the quiet hum of an African village, proved that humble availability is more powerful than aristocratic pedigree or extensive formal training. She showed that the gospel is a force for practical societal transformation. It saves infants, elevates women, establishes fair law, and creates economic opportunity. When she passed away, her work was not finished, but it was established, a living tree rooted deeply in the African soil, watered by her sacrifice and ready to bear the fruit of indigenous faith. Rest in the light. And so, dear friend, the story of Mary Slessor comes to its peaceful conclusion. A journey from the deafening machinery of the Scottish mills to the quiet stillness of the African night is now complete. The noise has faded. The struggle has ended. The pioneer has found her rest. And now, it is time for you to find yours. Take a slow, deep breath in through your nose, filling your lungs completely with the cool, quiet air of this moment. Hold it gently for just a moment. And now, release it slowly through your mouth, letting every muscle in your body soften as the breath leaves you. Feel the weight of the day, the weight of your thoughts, the weight of every concern, all of it flowing out with your exhale, carried away on the gentle current of your breath. You've traveled far tonight. You've walked beside Mary through the dark mills of Dundee, feeling the oppressive weight of poverty and the grinding exhaustion of endless labor. You've sailed with her across vast oceans, leaving behind everything familiar for the unknown promise of a divine calling. You've stood with her in the sweltering heat of the Okoyong jungle, witnessing her courage as she faced down warriors, rescued abandoned infants, and dismantled centuries of fear with nothing but faith and fierce, gentle love. And now, you have arrived at this moment of sacred rest. Just as Mary's long labor has ended, so too can yours. Tonight, you are released from the demands of the day. Tonight, you are free to simply be, to simply rest, to simply surrender to the peace that has been patiently waiting for you. The gift of stillness. In our modern world, rest has become a forgotten art. We fill every moment with noise, with activity, with the desperate pursuit of productivity. We have lost the ancient wisdom that Mary understood so deeply, that true strength is found not in endless striving, but in surrender. That true power flows not from our own efforts, but from our willingness to trust in something greater than ourselves. Mary Slessor spent her days pouring out her life like water on thirsty ground. She gave everything, her comfort, her health, her very future, for the sake of others. But she understood a profound truth that we often forget. Even the most dedicated servant must rest. Even the strongest warrior must lay down her sword. Even the most tireless pioneer must finally stop moving forward and allow herself to be still. And so, she teaches us, even now across the span of more than a century, that rest is not weakness. Rest is wisdom. Rest is holy. Rest is the place where we remember who we truly are and who we truly are. Breathe in this wisdom now. Let it fill not just your lungs, but your heart, your mind, your very soul. Breathe in the permission to rest. Breathe in the freedom to stop trying, stop worrying, stop carrying burdens that were never yours to bear. And as you exhale, release them all. Release the tension in your jaw, your shoulders, your hands. Release the worry about tomorrow. Release the regrets about yesterday. Release the need to be anything other than exactly what you are in this moment. A beloved child of the universe, safe, protected, and profoundly worthy of rest. The sacred darkness. Mary spent much of her life confronting darkness. The darkness of superstition, the darkness of fear, the darkness of cruelty born from ignorance and terror. But she also understood that darkness is not always the enemy. The darkness of night is the womb from which each new day is born. The darkness of sleep is the sacred space where healing happens, where the body repairs itself, where the mind processes and integrates all that it has learned. As you lie here now, allow yourself to embrace the darkness. Not the darkness of fear or despair, but the gentle darkness of rest, the welcoming darkness of sleep. This darkness is not empty, it is full of possibility, full of restoration, full of the quiet, patient work of renewal that can only happen when we stop our striving and surrender to the night. Let your eyelids grow heavy, so heavy that it would take tremendous effort to open them. And why would you? There is nothing you need to see right now. Nothing that requires your attention. Nothing that cannot wait until morning. Your only task now is to sink deeper into this sacred darkness, to let it hold you like a mother holds her sleeping child, with perfect tenderness, with absolute security, with unconditional love. Feel the darkness wrapping around you like a soft blanket, warm and protective. It shields you from the harsh light of worry. It insulates you from the sharp edges of the day's demands. It creates a cocoon of perfect safety where nothing can disturb your peace. The rhythm of surrender. Mary's life was shaped by rhythms. The rhythm of the factory looms, the rhythm of the African drums, the rhythm of morning prayers and evening lessons, the rhythm of crisis and resolution, danger and deliverance. But beneath all these rhythms was the deeper, steadier rhythm of her breathing, the rhythm of her heartbeat, the rhythm of her unshakable faith that carried her through every storm. You too have your rhythms. Right now, become aware of the gentle rise and fall of your chest as you breathe. Don't try to control it or change it. Simply observe it with kind, detached awareness. Notice how your body knows exactly what to do. It doesn't need your help to breathe, to pump blood, to heal, to rest. Your body is incredibly wise, carrying within it millions of years of evolutionary knowledge about how to survive, how to thrive, how to recover from the demands placed upon it. Trust this wisdom now. Trust your body's innate knowledge of what it needs. As you continue to breathe, imagine each inhale bringing in exactly what you need: peace, rest, healing, comfort. And each exhale carries away exactly what you don't need: tension, anxiety, pain, weariness, in and out, rising and falling, receiving and releasing. This is the rhythm of surrender, the ancient dance of trust that Mary knew so well. She trusted that if she gave her all during the day, God would provide rest at night. She trusted that if she emptied herself completely in service, she would be refilled. She trusted the rhythm, and it sustained her through 4 decades of impossible work. You can trust this rhythm too. Sink into it. Let it carry you. You don't need to hold yourself together anymore. You don't need to stay vigilant. The rhythm will carry you now, down into the deep, quiet waters of sleep, the peace that surpasses understanding. Throughout her life, Mary experienced peace in the most unlikely circumstances: peace in the midst of tribal warfare, peace when confronting armed warriors, peace while surrounded by disease and danger, peace when everything in her external circumstances should have produced fear. This was not the peace that comes from safety or comfort or the absence of threat. This was the peace that surpasses understanding, the inexplicable calm that flows from a source beyond ourselves, the peace that holds steady even when everything else is shaking. This peace is available to you now, not because your life is perfect, or your problems are solved, or your future is certain, but because you are held by something greater than your circumstances. You are sustained by a love that will not let you go. You are carried by grace that requires nothing from you except your willingness to receive it. Feel this peace now, like a gentle wave washing over you, starting at the crown of your head and flowing slowly down. It moves across your forehead, smoothing away the creases of concern. It flows over your eyes, relaxing the tiny muscles that have been working so hard all day. It washes down your cheeks, your jaw, your neck, dissolving tension, releasing tightness, inviting softness. The wave of peace continues down your shoulders, your arms, your hands. Feel how heavy your arms have become, how thoroughly relaxed. They sink into the surface beneath you, completely surrendered, completely at ease. The peace flows down your chest, your back, your abdomen. It releases any tightness in your breathing, any knots in your muscles. It reminds every cell in your body that right now, in this moment, you are safe, you are protected, you are loved. And the wave moves down your legs all the way to the tips of your toes, leaving in its wake a body that is completely, perfectly relaxed, a body that has let go of every bit of unnecessary tension, a body that has remembered how to rest. The mother of all people, Eka Kapukpru Ovo, the mother of all people. This was Mary's highest honor, the name given to her by those who knew her best, not because she was perfect, but because she was present, not because she never failed, but because she never stopped loving, not because she had all the answers, but because she showed up again and again with open arms and an open heart. Tonight, as you prepare to sleep, know that you too are held by a love that mothers you. Whether you call it God, the universe, divine grace, or simply the mystery at the heart of existence, you are held, you are seen, you are known. and you are cherished beyond measure. You don't have to earn this love through achievement. You don't have to prove your worth through endless productivity. You don't have to be anything other than what you are. You are enough. You have always been enough. You will always be enough. Let this truth sink deep into your bones. You are the beloved child of the universe, and tonight, like every night, you are invited to rest in the arms of a love that will never let you go. As you continue to breathe slowly and deeply, imagine yourself as one of the children Mary rescued from the bush. Imagine her finding you, lifting you with gentle hands, carrying you to safety. Imagine her creating a home for you, a place of warmth and welcome. Imagine her fierce protection, her tender care, her unwavering commitment to your well-being. This is how you are held right now. This is how you are carried. This is how you are loved. You can let go now. You can stop fighting, stop trying, stop holding on so tightly. You are safe. You are home. You are at rest. The long journey. Home Mary's life was one long journey. From Scotland to Africa, from the coast to the interior, from one village to the next. She was always moving, always pushing forward, always seeking the unreached. But every journey, no matter how far it takes us, is ultimately a journey home. Home to ourselves, home to the source of all love, home to the rest that our souls crave. Your journey today is also coming to an end. You've traveled through the hours, through your tasks and your responsibilities, through your joys and your challenges. You have done what needed to be done. You have been who you needed to be. And now, the journey is complete. Now, you are home. Home is not a place you have to travel to. It is right here, in this moment, in this breath, in this body that is ready to sleep. Home is the quiet space inside you that remains unchanged by the chaos outside. Home is the peace that is always available when you stop running and allow yourself to arrive. You are home now. Let yourself feel the relief of that. Let yourself feel the safety of that. Let yourself sink into the comfort of that truth. There is nowhere else you need to be. Nothing else you need to do. No one else you need to become. You have arrived at the end of this day's journey, and you have permission to rest. The legacy of rest. Mary Slessor left behind a powerful legacy. Churches built, children saved, customs abolished, justice established. But perhaps her greatest legacy is one we often overlook. Her demonstration that even the most epic work begins and ends with trust. Trust that we don't have to do everything. Trust that we are not alone in our efforts. Trust that rest is not laziness, but wisdom. She showed us that we can give our all during the day because we know rest will come at night. We can spend ourselves freely because we trust in replenishment. We can face impossible challenges because we rest in the arms of an impossible God. As you drift now towards sleep, you carry on this legacy. You demonstrate trust by letting go. You honor the sacred rhythm of work and rest. You acknowledge that you are human, finite, limited, and that this is not a flaw, but a feature of your beautiful design. You don't have to be everything to everyone. You don't have to solve every problem. You don't have to carry every burden. Tonight, you lay them all down. You place them in hands far bigger and stronger than yours. And you rest, knowing that you have done enough. You are enough. You have done enough. It is enough. Let these words wash over you like a blessing. You are enough. You have done enough. It is enough. The invitation to sleep. And now, dear one, comes the sweetest invitation of all. The invitation to let go completely. To stop listening to these words. Stop following these instructions. Stop doing anything at all. The invitation to simply drift, to float, to surrender utterly to the gentle pull of sleep. Your eyelids are so heavy now, heavy like stones, heavy like the quiet earth itself. They're sealed shut, and it feels so good to keep them that way. Your body is sinking deeper and deeper into the surface that supports you. You're being held, you're being carried. You don't have to hold yourself up anymore. Your mind is growing quieter, thoughts moving more and more slowly, like clouds drifting across a vast, empty sky. You watch them pass without grabbing onto them, without following them. You simply let them drift by, becoming more and more distant, more and more irrelevant. The sound of my voice is fading now, becoming part of the gentle background of the night. You might hear a word here or there, but mostly there is just the sense of being accompanied, of not being alone, of being gently guided down into the deep, peaceful waters of sleep. Down, down, down you go, deeper and deeper into rest, deeper and deeper into peace, deeper and deeper into the sacred darkness that heals and renews and restores. There is nothing to fear in this darkness. It is not empty, but full of grace, full of love, full of the quiet presence of the divine that never sleeps so that you can. You are safe, you are held, you are loved, you are free to sleep now, to sleep deeply and peacefully, to sleep without worry or disturbance, to sleep the sleep of the truly blessed. Mary's work is done, and so is yours. Her rest has come, and so has yours. Her peace is complete, and so is yours. Sleep now, sleep deeply, sleep peacefully. Let the night do its healing work. Let your body and mind recover from the day's demands. Let tomorrow take care of itself. Right now, there is only this moment, this breath, this delicious surrender to sleep. May the peace of the great I Am surround you like a fortress. May His love uphold you like everlasting arms. May His presence comfort you like the tenderest mother. And may you sleep deeply and peacefully until the morning light. The God who sustained Mary through every trial sustains you now. The God who protected her in every danger protects you now. The God who gave her rest after her labor gives you rest now. You are His beloved. You are safe. You are home. Sleep, dear one. Sleep in perfect peace. The night is long, and there is nothing you need to do but rest. Let go of every thought. Let go of every care. Let go of consciousness itself, and drift away into the deep, restorative sleep your body craves. Good night. Be at peace. Be at rest. Be blessed. If this meditation has brought you comfort and helped you find the peace you seek, we invite you to subscribe to our channel so we can continue to walk with you on your journey toward rest. Share this story with anyone in your life who needs to hear about courage, faith, and the sacred importance of rest. Together, we create a community of peace in a world that desperately needs it. Now rest, beloved. Simply rest. Good night.